Welcome and thank you for joining me again as I go over the first quarter phase. This will be the third phase of our lunar cycle so far. And with this practice, we will be looking at how we can take tangible action towards our intentions through the practice of discernment. So, right now, the moon is half illuminated, and depending on which part of the hemisphere you're in, it'll be illuminated on either the left or the right. For me, I'm in the northern hemisphere, so it's illuminated on the right side. So the moon is currently forming a 90-degree angle with the sun. And in astrology, this is called an aspect. And an aspect is when a celestial body, like the moon or the sun, and the planets create certain angles with each other. Now, this particular angle is a square. And a square is known to be a very action-oriented aspect, as well as a bit impulsive. So it's actually quite normal to experience conflict and tension during these times. With that being said, there's also a supportive energy that comes through with the fact that square aspects initiate and embrace change. And they very much give us the energy of taking the necessary action that's required so that we can achieve our intentions. And with that being said, all this cosmic energy makes this phase a yang phase. And just as a reminder, yang energy can be characterized as doing, initiating, giving, and speaking. So when it comes to yang energy, there was something that Ezzy Spencer pointed out in her book Lunar Abundance that I wanted to share because I found it very insightful, of the differences between effective and ineffective yang. So I'm going to list off some examples. I'll provide a text box so you can pause it and write it out, because I do find myself referring to this often just to ensure that I'm using yang energy in its most effective way. So that would be purpose-driven rather than achievement-oriented, focused direction rather than random busyness, experiencing from the head and the heart rather than overly intellectualizing everything, and being assertive and respectful rather than pushy and dominant. So the reason why I wanted to share this is because after reading that, I realized that I very much identified with ineffective yang energy. I still to this day have a tendency of over intellectualizing, of focusing on like what I could achieve rather than having like a purpose. And a purpose is something that I've been developing with a lot of consideration from my heart center. And definitely on the pushy and dominant side, I would say, I guess like being a Taurus and having my Venus in Aries isn't very helpful because it does have a lot of yang energy. And also the random busyness. Like I remember, like I mentioned in my last video for the waxing crescent, just being involved in so many things at once and hoping that it would kind of take me towards a direction and a purpose, not recognizing that these ineffective methods of embracing and embodying yang energy was actually creating a lot of blockages for me and was not supporting me in being introspective enough so that I could consider what path it was that I wanted to take. And of course, I want to make it very clear that at times we cannot help but be busy. That is the nature of capitalism, unfortunately, that a lot of the times the ways that we are busy do involve our work, and we need to work in order to survive and to have our most basic needs met. So that is not what I mean in terms of like ceasing busyness, but again, like just like having a focused direction, being purpose driven, being assertive and respectful helps a lot to manage the way that you are busy in a way that's sustainable. So it's more about learning the difference between working harder and pushing yourself harder and working smarter. And since the last practice that we had with the waxing crescent was developing sustainability, it comes in conflict with that practice if we're just pushing ourselves harder and forcing ourselves to work harder, essentially. And that is where the practice of discernment becomes very important, because discernment allows us to work smarter in the instances where we really have no choice but to work. And what the practice of discernment helps with is developing a sound judgment and being able to perceive the truth. And through that practice, we're able to cultivate what it is that we need in the moment, release what we no longer need in that moment, and it gives us a clear idea of where we need to refrain from adopting certain attitudes in the cultures around us that do not allow us to have sustainability. And part of this process is making mistakes. And like I do remind you in pretty much every video, I'm pretty sure, is not to be judgmental through this process. We're going to make mistakes. It's just human nature to make mistakes. Literally, that was news for me because I really, as a recovering perfectionist, I really thought that I have to get things right the first time. Even this process of making the videos has been interesting because I've had to let go of a lot of perfection in order to make it sustainable for me and also to be consistent with what I'm releasing. And it is through the mistakes that we make that we actually learn the most. And there's no way that we can reach our fullest potential without making several mistakes along the way, so that we can become more aware of what it is that we need to do, how to do it, and how to do it in a way that's sustainable for us. And that is the practice of developing sound judgment and perceiving the truth. And if we don't allow ourselves these opportunities to make mistakes as we're going through this path, it'll be a very difficult practice to continue moving forward. So there is also a call to be fluid. Although this is a very heavy young oriented energy during this phase, and it does call for action, it's also very important to honor if you need to rest as well. And like I mentioned in my last video, rest is also an action. It's just an extremely underrated action because there isn't always as much movement involved in it and busyness involved in it. It's more introspective, I would say, and more restful. However, it's very important that you honor where you are, regardless of where you're placed during this lunar cycle, so that, again, we don't lose that practice of sustainability that we built during the last phase, and we can continue developing it. So a practice that was provided in Ezzy Spencer's book was making a list of non-negotiables as well as concrete actions. And these two lists will help you better prioritize what actions you need to take in order to get closer to the intentions that you set. So concrete action refers to things like sleeping, eating, basically, I would say anything that is within our, I want to say Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I'll probably pop up an image so you see what I'm referring to. And when we talk about concrete action, it's like that bottom tier of like sleeping, eating, working, the things that help us function in day to day that are just set in concrete, essentially. There's nothing that we can really do to move or adjust those things. And then our non-negotiables, it will really depend on our intention. So a non-negotiable for me is connecting with myself, at least one that I want to develop, is connecting with myself. It could also be like making time to be creative. That could be another non-negotiable. So as you list these things, you can see how you can take action towards moving in the direction of your intentions, and you can see where you can adjust things. Now, I would say the concrete actions will most likely be areas where you will not have as much flexibility. However, the non-negotiables can be adjusted in a way that best supports the action. And if you find that there's just really no way to balance it all, you could also consider the fact that you may need to change the intention that you set. So this will be actually the first practice where we refer back to the new moon intention that we had, whether you wrote it down, video recorded it, or voice noted it. We'll go back to the intention. We'll see what it was that we wanted to manifest. And again, if you find that your list of non-negotiables and your concrete actions are just not aligning with your intention, this would be the time to kind of course correct and be like, okay, so maybe I can adjust my intentions in this way so that it's more supportive and sustainable for me. So that is the practice of the first quarter moon. Please let me know in the comments how that's resonated for you, how the lunar cycle has been treating you so far. Currently, we're halfway from the new moon and the full moon, so we're like halfway through our journey with the lunar cycle. I'm just very curious to see how that's been for you, and some examples of some non-negotiables that you have in your life, as well as concrete actions, and maybe your feelings around finding balance in a world that just consistently asks us to be busy, and maybe some solutions that you've created and flexibility that you've experienced around that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the fact that you've made it all the way here and that you found me. And I really look forward to getting into the next lunar phase with you, which will be the waxing gibbous phase. Take care.